Imagine a creature so fearsome, its very existence fills the heart with dread. A beast that breathes fire and devours human flesh. Hercules, the legendary hero, was tasked with facing this terrifying beast. Its name? The man-eating Mars of Diomedes. King Eurystheus, Hercules' cousin and king of Mycenae, was a cruel and jealous man. He sought to humiliate Hercules, the son of Zeus, and prove his own superiority. To this end, he tasked Hercules with 12 seemingly impossible feats, known as the 12 labors. The 8th of these labors was the most terrifying. Eurystheus demanded that Hercules capture the man-eating Mars of Diomedes, the king of Thrace. These beasts were said to be so ferocious that they breathed fire and devoured human flesh. Their hooves were bronze, and their horns were made of gold. They were kept chained in a bronze manger in Diomedes' palace, and no one dared to approach them. The task was one of great danger, but Hercules, ever the hero, accepted it without hesitation. He knew that if he failed, Eurystheus would never let him rest. Hercules, knowing the danger of the task ahead, gathered a small band of companions. Among them was Abderus, a young and brave warrior who was fiercely loyal to Hercules. Abderus had accompanied Hercules on many of his adventures, and he was eager to prove his worth. Abderus was a skilled swordsman and a fearless fighter. He was also a loyal friend, always willing to stand by Hercules, no matter the danger. Their bond was forged in the crucible of battle, and they had faced countless challenges together. Abderus had saved Hercules' life on more than one occasion, and Hercules, in turn, had protected Abderus from harm. Hercules knew that he could count on Abderus to see this task through. He was a man of honor and courage, and he would not let Hercules down. As they set sail for Thrace, Hercules felt a sense of confidence that he had not felt in a long time. He knew that with Abderus by his side, he could face any challenge that came his way. The journey to Thrace was a perilous one. Hercules and Abderus braved the treacherous waters of the Aegean Sea, facing storms that threatened to capsize their ship. They encountered pirates who sought to plunder their vessel and sea monsters that lurked in the depths. Yet, with Hercules' strength and Abderus' skill, they managed to overcome all obstacles. Finally, after many days at sea, they reached the shores of Thrace, a land renowned for its untamed beauty and fierce inhabitants. The landscape was a stark contrast to the familiar shores of Greece, with towering mountains, dense forests, and rushing rivers. The people of Thrace were known for their fierce loyalty to their king and their warrior spirit. Hercules and Abderus made their way inland, following the winding path that led to Diomedes' palace. The palace was a massive structure, made of stone and marble, and surrounded by a high wall. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of intruders. As they approached the palace, Hercules and Abderus could hear the thunderous neighs of the Mars. They knew that they were close to their destination. A shiver ran down Hercules' spine as he imagined the creatures that awaited them. The Mars were said to be so ferocious that they breathed fire and devoured human flesh. Their hooves were bronze, and their horns were made of gold. They were kept chained in a bronze manger, and no one dared to approach them. Hercules and Abderus knew that capturing the Mars would be no easy task. They would have to be both cunning and brave to succeed. But they were determined to complete their mission, no matter the cost. The Mars were a terrifying sight. Their coats were as black as night, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Their hooves were bronze, and their horns were made of gold, shimmering in the sunlight. Their neighs were like the roar of a lion, and their breath was hot and foul-smelling. The maras were kept chained in a bronze manger, their chains heavy and thick. They were wild and untamed, constantly struggling against their restraints. Their manes were matted and tangled, and their bodies were covered in scars from their constant battles with each other. The maras were said to be so ferocious that they breathed fire and devoured human flesh. No one dared to approach them, for they were believed to be cursed by the gods. Their presence filled the air with a sense of dread, and even the bravest warriors feared to face them. Their ferocity was legendary. Tales were told of travelers who had ventured too close to the palace and had been devoured by the maras. Their screams echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked within the walls. The maras were not merely beasts of prey. They were symbols of chaos and destruction, a force of nature that could not be tamed. Their existence was a constant threat to the peace and prosperity of the land. Hercules and Abderus knew that capturing the maras would be no easy task. The palace was heavily guarded, and the maras were kept in a secure enclosure. They would have to be both cunning and brave to succeed. They decided to strike at night, when the guards were less vigilant. Under the cover of darkness, they crept up to the palace walls. Hercules, with his superhuman strength, scaled the wall with ease. Abderus followed, using a rope that Hercules had tied to a nearby tree. Once inside the palace, they moved silently, avoiding the patrolling guards. They made their way to the stable where the maras were kept. The stable was a massive structure, filled with the stench of animals and the sound of hooves stamping on the ground. The guards were stationed at the entrance to the stable, their weapons drawn. Hercules and Abderus knew that they would have to fight their way in. They charged at the guards, their swords flashing in the moonlight. The guards were no match for Hercules' strength, and they were quickly overwhelmed. With the guards out of the way, Hercules and Abderus burst into the stable. The maras reared up on their hind legs, their eyes blazing with fury. They breathed fire and lashed out with their hooves, but Hercules and Abderus were prepared. They dodged the maras' attacks, their swords flashing like lightning. After a fierce battle, Hercules and Abderus managed to subdue the maras. They secured the chains around the maras' necks and led them out of the stable. The maras struggled against their restraints, but they were no match for Hercules' strength. As they made their way out of the palace, they could hear the shouts of the guards who had been alerted to the break-in. But it was too late. Hercules and Abderus had succeeded. They had captured the man-eating maras of Diomedes. As Hercules and Abderus made their way out of the palace, they were confronted by Diomedes, the king of Thrace. Diomedes was a fierce warrior, and he was furious that his maras had been stolen. He drew his sword and charged at Hercules, his eyes filled with rage. Hercules, however, was not afraid. He met Diomedes in combat, his sword flashing like lightning. The two warriors fought with a ferocity that was unmatched. Diomedes was a skilled swordsman, but he was no match for Hercules' strength and experience. Hercules struck Diomedes a powerful blow, knocking him to the ground. Diomedes struggled to get up, but Hercules pinned him down with his foot. Diomedes begged for mercy, but Hercules would have none of it. He had been tasked with capturing the maras, and he would not allow anything to stand in his way. Hercules raised his sword and prepared to strike the fatal blow. But before he could do so, Abderus stepped in. He pleaded with Hercules to spare Diomedes' life. Abderus argued that killing the king would only lead to more violence. He suggested that they take Diomedes as a prisoner and bring him back to Mycenae. Hercules hesitated. He knew that Abderus was right. Killing Diomedes would only make matters worse. He nodded in agreement, and ordered his men to secure the king. With Diomedes in their custody, Hercules and Abderus continued their journey. The Mares were wild and unruly, and they struggled against their chains. But Hercules and Abderus managed to keep them under control. Finally, after many days of travel, they reached the shores of Greece. They returned to Mycenae, where they presented the Mares to King Eurystheus. Eurystheus was impressed by Hercules' bravery and strength, but he was also deeply disturbed by the Mares' savage nature. He ordered Hercules to release the Mares, who were then set free to roam the wild. With the Mares secured, Hercules and Abderus made their way out of the palace. They had to be careful not to raise an alarm, as the guards were sure to be on the lookout for them. They moved silently through the palace, avoiding the patrolling guards. As they approached the palace gates, they could hear the shouts of the guards who had been alerted to the break-in. Hercules knew that they would have to fight their way out. He drew his sword and charged at the guards, his eyes filled with determination. The guards were no match for Hercules' strength, and they were quickly overwhelmed. Abderus fought alongside him, his sword flashing like lightning. With the guards out of the way, Hercules and Abderus led the Mares through the gates. Once outside the palace, they had to find a way to escape the city. They knew that the guards would be searching for them, and they would have to act quickly. They followed a winding path that led to the outskirts of the city. As they made their way through the countryside, they could hear the shouts of the guards pursuing them. But Hercules and Abderus were determined to escape. They pushed the Mares to their limits, urging them to run faster and faster. Finally, they reached the shore. They loaded the Mares onto a small boat that they had hidden nearby. With the Mares safely aboard, they set sail for Greece. The journey was long and perilous, but Hercules and Abderus were determined to see it through. As Hercules and Abderus continued their journey, Abderus grew weary. He had been fighting for hours, and his strength was beginning to fade. He decided to take a rest, and he found a sheltered spot under a tree. As Abderus laid down, he noticed that the Mares were becoming restless. They neighed loudly and pawed at the ground. Hercules tried to calm them, but it was no use. The Mares were wild and unpredictable, and they were growing increasingly agitated. Suddenly, one of the Mares broke free from its chains. It charged at Abderus, its eyes filled with a savage hunger. Abderus tried to defend himself, but he was no match for the mare's powerful jaws. The mare lunged at him, sinking its teeth into his flesh. Abderus screamed in agony as the mare tore into him. Hercules tried to help his friend, but it was too late. The mare was relentless, and it continued to attack Abderus until he was dead. Hercules was overcome with grief. He had lost a dear friend, and he was filled with anger and despair. He vowed to avenge Abderus' death, and he vowed to never let the Mares harm anyone else. With a heavy heart, Hercules buried Abderus on the spot. He erected a small monument to his friend, and he vowed to remember him forever. Hercules was overcome with grief. He had lost a dear friend, and he was filled with anger and despair. He had fought alongside Abderus for years, and they had shared countless adventures together. Abderus had been more than just a companion. He had been a brother to Hercules. Hercules felt a deep sense of guilt, as if he had somehow failed to protect his friend. He blamed himself for Abderus' death, and he vowed to avenge him. He was consumed by a burning desire for revenge, and he would stop at nothing to see justice done. Hercules' grief was so profound that it threatened to consume him. He withdrew from the world, spending days alone, lost in his sorrow. He could not bear to think about the future, and he was haunted by visions of Abderus' final moments. But even in his darkest hour, Hercules did not lose hope. He knew that he had to find a way to move on. He had to honor Abderus' memory by completing the task that he had been given. And so, with a heavy heart, Hercules pressed on, determined to see his mission through to the end. With a heavy heart, Hercules buried Abderus on the spot. He dug a grave, using his bare hands to loosen the earth. He laid his friend to rest, covering him with a blanket that he had brought with him. Over the grave, Hercules erected a small monument. He used stones that he had found nearby to build a simple cairn. He placed the sword on top of the cairn, a symbol of Abderus' bravery and loyalty. As he stood by the grave, Hercules said a prayer for his friend. He asked the gods to watch over Abderus and grant him eternal peace. He vowed to remember Abderus always, and he promised to complete his mission in his honor. Hercules then turned his attention to the Maras. He knew that he could not let them harm anyone else. He secured their chains more tightly and vowed to keep them under control. With a heavy heart, Hercules continued his journey. He was determined to see his mission through to the end, and he knew that Abderus would be watching over him. With Abderus gone, Hercules was filled with a deep sense of loneliness. He missed his friend dearly, and he found it difficult to focus on his mission. But he knew that he had to press on, for the sake of Abderus' memory. The journey to Mycenae was long and arduous. Hercules and the Maras had to cross treacherous mountains and dense forests. They faced wild animals and hostile tribes. But Hercules, with his superhuman strength, was able to overcome all obstacles. The Maras were a constant source of trouble. They were wild and unruly, and they struggled against their chains. They often tried to escape, and they would sometimes attack Hercules and his men. But Hercules was determined to keep them under control. As they approached Mycenae, the city was shrouded in a thick fog. Hercules could not see where he was going, and he feared that they might be lost. But he pressed on, trusting in his instincts. Finally, they emerged from the fog. The city of Mycenae lay before them, its walls towering over the surrounding countryside. Hercules and the Maras entered the city through the main gate. The people of Mycenae were amazed to see the Maras. They had never seen such fearsome creatures before, and they were terrified. But Hercules reassured them that the Maras were under his control. Hercules led the Maras to the palace, where he presented them to King Eurystheus. Eurystheus was impressed by Hercules' bravery and strength, but he was also deeply disturbed by the Maras' savage nature. He ordered Hercules to release the Maras, who were then set free to roam the wild. With the eighth labor completed, Hercules returned to his home in Thebes. He was a hero, but he was also a man who had lost a dear friend. He would never forget Abderus, and he would always carry the memory of his sacrifice with him. Hercules led the Maras to the palace, where he presented them to King Eurystheus. Eurystheus was a cruel and jealous man, and he was eager to see Hercules humiliated. He had expected Hercules to fail the eighth labor, and he was surprised to see him return with the Maras. As Eurystheus approached the Maras, he could feel their power. They were wild and untamed, and they seemed to radiate an aura of danger. The king was both fascinated and terrified by these creatures. Hercules presented the Maras to Eurystheus, explaining how he had captured them. Eurystheus was impressed by Hercules' bravery and strength, but he was also deeply disturbed by the Maras' savage nature. He knew that these creatures were a danger to his kingdom. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to release the Maras, which he did reluctantly. He knew that the Mares were a danger, but he also knew that he had completed his task. He had captured the Mares, and he had brought them back to Mycenae. As the Mares galloped away, Eurystheus watched them with a mixture of fear and admiration. He knew that he would never forget the day that Hercules had brought these terrifying creatures to his kingdom. Eurystheus was a cruel and jealous man, and he was eager to see Hercules humiliated. He had expected Hercules to fail the eighth labor, and he was surprised to see him return with the Mares. As Eurystheus approached the Mares, he could feel their power. They were wild and untamed, and they seemed to radiate an aura of danger. The king was both fascinated and terrified by these creatures. Hercules presented the Mares to Eurystheus, explaining how he had captured them. Eurystheus was impressed by Hercules' bravery and strength, but he was also deeply disturbed by the Mares' savage nature. He knew that these creatures were a danger to his kingdom. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to release the Mares, which he did reluctantly. He knew that the Mares were a danger, but he also knew that he had completed his task. He had captured the Mares, and he had brought them back to Mycenae. As the Mares galloped away, Eurystheus watched them with a mixture of fear and admiration. He knew that he would never forget the day that Hercules had brought these terrifying creatures to his kingdom. As Hercules watches the man-eating Mares gallop away into the distance, the sun sets on a day filled with both triumph and tragedy. He has proven his strength, his courage, and his loyalty to his friend, Abderus. Yet, the weight of loss hangs heavy upon him. The journey ahead will be filled with challenges, but Hercules knows that he must press on, not only for himself but for the memory of his fallen comrade. The world is still full of darkness and danger, and there are countless monsters that threaten humanity. Hercules will face new trials and tribulations, but he is determined to overcome them all. He is a hero, and his legend will live on for generations to come. Thank you for watching. Please comment below what you would like to see next.